Imagine the terrifying roar of military helicopter blades slicing through the pitch-black night sky over the vast, cold expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Inside the cabin, men and women sit blindfolded, their hands tightly bound behind their backs with heavy wire. They are not prisoners of war. They are teachers, students, union leaders, and political dissidents. Before they can even process their impending doom, the doors slide open, letting in a blast of freezing wind. Without trial, without a word of explanation, they are shoved into the abyss, plunging thousands of feet into the crushing depths below, their bodies weighted down with iron rails so they will never resurface. This was not a nightmare, these were the infamous death flights. And the man who orchestrated this unprecedented method of mass execution was none other than General Augusto Pinochet, the ruthless dictator of Chile. He did not act in the shadows of wartime desperation, but from the opulent halls of the presidential palace, wearing dark sunglasses and an immaculately tailored uniform. To understand the sheer brutality of Pinochet's regime, we must look beyond the economic miracles often attributed to him, and stare directly into the abyss of his torture chambers. This is the story of a military man who believed that the only way to save his country was to exterminate a generation of its people, leaving a legacy of blood that still divides a nation today. To comprehend Pinochet's reign of terror, we must return to the explosive morning of September 11, 1973. Santiago, the vibrant capital of Chile, was violently awakened by the thunderous sound of fighter jets screaming overhead. Their target was not a foreign enemy, but La Moneda, the historic presidential palace, where the democratically elected Marxist president, Salvador Allende, was barricaded inside. For months, the country had been paralyzed by strikes, hyperinflation, and deep political polarization, creating a volatile powder keg ready to blow. Augusto Pinochet, the commander-in-chief of the army whom Allende had deeply trusted and appointed just weeks prior, had secretly aligned with right-wing forces and the CIA to orchestrate a devastating coup d'état. As British-made Hawker Hunter jets unleashed a barrage of rockets onto the palace, setting it ablaze in thick plumes of black smoke, democracy in Chile died in the flames. Inside the burning building, Allende delivered his final radio broadcast, a defiant and poetic farewell to the Chilean people, before taking his own life rather than surrendering to the military junta. The military's swift and overwhelmingly brutal show of force was designed to shatter any hope of resistance. Within hours, the streets were swarming with soldiers, tanks rolled through the avenues, and Pinochet swiftly emerged as the undisputed leader of a new, iron-fisted military junta. He immediately suspended the constitution, dissolved Congress, and banned all political parties, declaring a state of siege that would plunge the nation into 17 years of unimaginable darkness. In the immediate aftermath of the coup, the sheer scale of the repression was staggering and highly visible. Pinochet needed to send a terrifying message to anyone who dared harbor leftist sympathies. He ordered the military to round up thousands of suspected political opponents, turning the iconic Estadio Nacional, the national stadium of Chile, into a massive, open-air concentration camp. Over 40,000 people, including students, factory workers, journalists, and folk singers, were herded into the stadium like cattle at gunpoint. The bleachers, normally filled with cheering soccer fans, were now crowded with terrified civilians shivering in the cold nights, awaiting their unknown fate. The locker rooms and underground corridors were transformed into makeshift torture chambers, echoing with the horrifying screams of the brutally interrogated. Executions were carried out daily, the sound of firing squads echoing across the empty field. Among the victims was Victor Jara, a beloved folk singer and poet whose hands were systematically smashed by soldiers with rifle butts to ensure he could never play his guitar again. Defiant to the end, Jara continued to sing to his fellow prisoners until his body was riddled with 44 bullets. This public display of sheer barbarity was a calculated psychological weapon. Pinochet wanted the entire nation to see the horrific consequences of dissent. The blood spilled in the national stadium was just the prologue to a systematic campaign of state-sponsored terrorism that would operate in the shadows for nearly 2 decades. While the stadium horrors were public, the true nightmare of Pinochet's regime was institutionalized through a secret organization known as the DINA, National Intelligence Directorate. Often described as Pinochet's Gestapo, the DINA was led by the ruthless Colonel Manuel Contreras, a man who answered only to the general himself. Pinochet granted the DINA unlimited power, absolute funding, and complete immunity from the law. They established a clandestine network of secret detention and torture centers across the country, operating out of unmarked buildings and remote rural estates. The most notorious of these was Villa Grimaldi, a beautiful estate on the outskirts of Santiago that was transformed into a veritable factory of human suffering. Inside its walls, agents employed unimaginably sadistic torture methods designed not just to extract information, but to utterly break the human spirit. Prisoners were subjected to severe electric shocks on metallic grids known as the grill, sexual violence, waterboarding, and psychological torment. Many victims simply vanished without a trace, becoming the desaparecidos, that disappeared. Families were left in agonizing limbo, constantly searching hospitals and morgues for loved ones who had been secretly executed and buried in unmarked graves or thrown into the ocean. Pinochet vehemently denied these atrocities to the international press, dismissing the claims as communist propaganda, while actively reading daily intelligence briefings detailing the torture and elimination of his own citizens. Pinochet's paranoia and thirst for absolute control extended far beyond the capital. He needed to ensure that the military brass across the entire nation was thoroughly cleansed of any moderate voices or hesitant commanders. In October 1973, he authorized a brutal mission that would become known as the Caravan of Death. A heavily armed military squad, traveling via Puma helicopters, moved methodically from town to town across provincial Chile. Led by General Sergio Arellano Stark, Pinochet's personal delegate, the death squad arrived at military garrisons, bypassed local judicial authority, and reviewed lists of political prisoners already being held. Without trials or evidence, they ordered the immediate execution of at least 97 people, including local mayors, peasant leaders, and left-wing intellectuals. The victims were often taken to deserts or remote hillsides, brutally tortured, and hacked to death with machetes before being buried in mass graves. The utter savagery of the Caravan of Death served a dual purpose: it eliminated potential political threats in the provinces, and it deeply compromised the local military commanders. By forcing them to be complicit in unspeakable war crimes, Pinochet guaranteed their eternal loyalty through shared guilt. Blood bound the military together. Pinochet explicitly warned that not a single leaf moved in Chile without him knowing it, cementing a pervasive atmosphere of terror where neighbor feared neighbor, and silence was the only guarantee of survival. Having cemented his bloody grip on the domestic front, Pinochet turned his paranoia outward. The dictator realized that Chilean exiles, organizing in foreign countries, posed a significant threat to his international image and grip on power. Thus, Operation Condor was born. In 1975, Pinochet hosted a clandestine summit in Santiago, bringing together intelligence chiefs from the military dictatorships of Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil. They formed a horrific alliance, a transnational state-sponsored terrorism network designed to track down, kidnap, and assassinate political refugees regardless of where they fled. Pinochet's assassins operated with chilling efficiency across borders. In Buenos Aires, they murdered General Carlos Prats, Pinochet's predecessor who opposed the coup, by blowing up his car. In Rome, they shot a prominent Chilean politician in the head. But their most audacious attack occurred in 1976, right in the heart of the United States. Orlando Letelier, a prominent opponent of Pinochet, was driving to work in Washington, D.C., when a remote-controlled bomb planted under his car detonated on Embassy Row. The explosion killed Letelier and his young American assistant. This brazen act of terrorism on American soil shocked the world and proved that Pinochet's long arm of vengeance recognized no borders. The dictator was willing to risk diplomatic fallout with the most powerful nation on earth just to silence a single dissenting voice. To justify his brutal police state to the international community, Pinochet leaned heavily on the narrative of an economic miracle. After overthrowing Allende's socialist economy, the dictator handed control of the nation's finances to the Chicago Boys, a group of Chilean economists trained under the ultra-free market theories of Milton Friedman at the University of Chicago. Pinochet slashed government spending, dismantled labor unions, privatized state-owned industries, and opened the economy to foreign investment. On paper, inflation dropped, and GDP growth skyrocketed, earning praise from Western conservatives who saw Chile as a successful laboratory for neoliberal capitalism. But this so-called miracle was built on a foundation of blood and immense suffering. The drastic economic shock therapy devastated the working class. Unemployment soared to catastrophic levels, real wages plummeted, and poverty engulfed millions. While a small elite and foreign investors reaped astronomical profits from privatized copper and resources, ordinary Chileans starved. Workers could not protest for better conditions because union leaders were routinely disappeared by the DINA. Pinochet's economic success was utterly dependent on his military terror. Free markets were paradoxically enforced by the suppression of a free society. The dictator effectively sold his country's soul to global markets, creating a deeply fractured society with extreme wealth inequality that still haunts Chile's socio-economic fabric today. As the years dragged on, Pinochet cultivated an intense cult of personality, projecting himself as the strict but necessary father figure who had saved Chile from the grip of communism. He meticulously crafted his public image. He was rarely seen without his perfectly pressed military uniform, an imposing cape, and opaque dark sunglasses that masked his eyes, presenting an aura of chilling invulnerability and detached authority. He mandated that his portrait be hung in public buildings, schools, and offices across the nation. State-controlled media relentlessly broadcast propaganda portraying him as a devout Catholic and a patriot favored by God. Pinochet truly believed his own mythology. He saw himself not as a murderer, but as an indispensable historic figure leading a righteous crusade. He rewrote the Constitution in 1980, ensuring his continued rule and baking military oversight into the very fabric of the supposedly democratic institutions he promised for the future. The Constitution included an amnesty law specifically designed to protect him and his military officers from prosecution for any human rights abuses committed between 1973 and 1978. Surrounded by sycophants and isolated by absolute power, Pinochet grew intensely arrogant, convinced that his legacy would be celebrated for generations, utterly oblivious to the deep, simmering hatred festering beneath the surface of his terrified populace. Pinochet's arrogance ultimately engineered his own political downfall. Confident in his manipulated popularity and tightly controlled economy, he scheduled a national plebiscite in 1988, asking the Chilean people a simple question: yes, for 8 more years of his rule, or no, to transition back to democracy. He expected an overwhelming victory to legitimize his dictatorship internationally. However, he drastically underestimated the courage of the Chilean people and the power of organized resistance. A coalition of opposition parties rallied together, creating a brilliant, joyful, and deeply emotional television campaign centered around the word "no," promising a future without fear. Despite widespread intimidation tactics by the military and state media bias, millions of Chileans bravely took to the streets and the ballot boxes. On the night of October 5, 1988, the unthinkable happened. The NO vote won with nearly 56%. Furious and humiliated, Pinochet attempted to orchestrate a self-coup to annul the results, but his fellow generals, sensing the shifting geopolitical winds and fearing a civil war, refused to support him. Forced to concede, Pinochet stepped down from the presidency in 1990. However, the true horror of his reign was that he didn't disappear into obscurity. Thanks to the constitution he had written, he remained the commander-in-chief of the army for 8 more years and secured a position as a senator for life, effectively granting himself perpetual immunity and looming over the fragile new democracy like a dark, threatening shadow. Justice, however delayed, finally caught up to the aging dictator in an unexpected way. In 1998, while visiting London for back surgery, Pinochet was dramatically arrested in his clinic by British police acting on an international arrest warrant issued by a Spanish judge, Baltasar Garzón. He was charged with human rights violations, including torture and murder. The arrest sent shockwaves globally, establishing a historic legal precedent that former heads of state could not hide behind sovereign immunity for crimes against humanity. For 503 days, Pinochet was held under house arrest in the UK as a bitter legal battle raged. Ultimately, he evaded a criminal trial by claiming mild dementia and poor health, leading the British government to release him on compassionate grounds. When his plane touched down in Chile, the supposedly feeble old man dramatically rose from his wheelchair and triumphantly embraced his military supporters, a final slap in the face to his victims. He spent his remaining years fighting off over 300 criminal charges for human rights abuses and massive tax evasion linked to secret offshore bank accounts, shattering his carefully cultivated image of a clean patriot. Augusto Pinochet died in 2006 at the age of 91, never having faced a judge or being convicted for the thousands he tortured and murdered. He died leaving behind a broken society, proving that while dictators may escape the courtroom, history will forever remember the blood on their hands.